Hey guys, welcome back to the channel where today we're going to get into a topic that comes up quite often in the groups that I facilitate. For those of you that don't know, right now I offer 4 free online groups a week where we explore how to use the skills of dialectical behaviour therapy when they're integrated with the theories of personality that we get from schema therapy to support people with living the life they want to live by being who they want to be in areas of life that are important to them. On Saturdays, I co-facilitate a meeting where the primary focus is on relationship building from a recovery perspective. We work on building an understanding for the different attachment styles that people develop throughout their childhood experiences, as well as the dominant and primary schemas that we hold on to that often cause us to gravitate towards familiar relationship dynamics, which generally just keep us trapped in the same type of relationship over and over and over again. One of the more common areas of discussion that shows up inside of these conversations is the topic of narcissism and how to spot it in others, as well as how to understand why it keeps presenting as a common occurrence within the relationships we fall into in general. So today I'd like to talk about the difference between a personality trait and a personality disorder, as well as identifying the 3 different types of narcissism that some of us can be subconsciously drawn towards. So let's talk about it. First off, I want to be really clear that the purpose of this video is for information only and not to provide a diagnosis of any kind at all. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I'm a talk therapist, a coach and a counsellor, so I don't possess the training or the qualifications to provide a diagnosis of any kind. And if you want to explore this topic further once you've watched this video, all of the reference material I used to research the making of this particular video is listed in the description below. The purpose of this video is education. It's about building awareness for our own red flags so we can spot the presence of these behaviours in either ourselves or other people. Then we can get the support we need or set the appropriate boundaries to live the life we want to live according to our own values and beliefs. And just to be clear, that doesn't mean running around labelling everyone we disagree with as a narcissist just because we saw a video on YouTube. First of all, it's pretty much a given that most people can fall into basic displays of narcissistic behaviours from time to time. And this isn't an indicator that people who do this are dealing with their own version of narcissistic personality disorder. In fact, if you were to play Google Psychiatrist, for example, and take the time to explore the 10 different types of personality disorder, going over the criteria for each one, you'd probably find a few behaviours of your own that line up with a large number of these diagnoses. But this doesn't mean that you've got these particular personality disorders. Neither does it mean if you see these behaviours in other people that they've got them too. While it's very easy to label someone as being a narcissist because of a particular entitled or grandiose behaviour, in actuality, narcissistic personality disorder, otherwise known as NPD, is quite a rare condition. The best way that I've learned to understand the difference between an individual personality trait and the presence of a personality disorder is to think of our own behaviours on a continuum. In other words, from a dialectical perspective, on one side of the continuum, there are 0 aspects of the behaviour where we never engage in actions or thinking that line up with this particular way of being. And on the other side of the continuum are those whose lives are significantly impacted by these behavioural responses all of the time throughout their day-to-day existence. The closer you are to this side of the continuum, the more likely you are to fall into the category of dealing with that particular personality disorder. Generally speaking, people fall somewhere in between these 2 extremes, and most people fall on this side of the continuum where they have the occasional behaviour but nothing for us to worry about. Sometimes we're aware of these behaviours and sometimes we're not. But the primary difference between a personality trait and a personality disorder is that the person's personality trait becomes so rigid and extreme within the personality system that it causes significant impairment in the person's psychological functioning, so much so that it starts to really affect their interpersonal relationships. So if you find yourself looking in the mirror and thinking, boy, do I look good today, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a raging narcissist who needs a shitload of therapy to figure these things out. But if you find yourself or someone you know really struggling with these things, seek out some support to help you understand more and take the actions we need to take to make the changes we want to make. So, what exactly is a narcissist then, and how might we spot the behaviours associated with the disorder? Let's start with a general overview of NPD according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which at the time of this recording is currently on version number 5. More often than not, individuals who fall on the extreme side of the narcissistic continuum and therefore meet the criteria for the diagnosis of NPD feel a need to be the centre of attention, which they can achieve in a number of different ways that we'll get into later on. They tend to have an extremely high and often grandiose sense of self-importance, an exaggerated sense of talent and achievement, a preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited power, beauty, brilliance, and even sexual ability. As a result, they tend to have a strong underlying need for admiration and attention from others, which, when not there, can activate feelings of humiliation and shame, which can lead to rage, particularly when experiencing things like criticism, even if it's intended to be constructive, or a feeling of indifference from other people, especially if they feel defeated in some way. There can also be a deep feeling of envy of others and their achievements, or on the flip side of that, there can be a belief that others are in fact extremely envious of them. And there's an overarching sense of entitlement and arrogance with a belief that the rules just don't apply to them. The biggest indicator that narcissistic behaviours and beliefs could be an issue pushing a person towards a diagnosis of NPD is the complete lack of empathy for other people and the emotional experiences that are often activated in relationship dynamics as a result of their own behaviours. And so for many people with NPD, there's a tendency to take advantage of people in order to achieve what they want to achieve with little to no consideration for the impact of their actions. Statistically speaking, NPD is actually quite rare, affecting roughly 6% of the population. And it's true that most of those who are diagnosed with NPD are usually males. However, this doesn't mean that NPD isn't present within the female population. In fact, it's often the case that the behaviours show up under a shroud of histrionics or big emotional reactions, the type of which can cause those that diagnose these things to attach one of the other labels that fall under what's known as cluster B of personality disorders, those that get labelled as being dramatic and erratic. And there tends to be a considerable amount of overlap between these particular types of disorder that fall under this particular cluster. But remember, as I said before, a person can have narcissistic traits but not have the disorder. A great example of what this might look like is to imagine a successful athlete. Within their chosen sport, they might be naturally gifted and have a high level of confidence in their ability that may come off as being quite arrogant sometimes. However, away from the limelight of their sporting achievements, they're extremely humble. They're involved in healthy, adaptive and reciprocating relationships, as well as having empathy and compassion for other people. A narcissist is simply not capable of these things, even though on the surface, sometimes they might seem as though they are. In fact, a narcissist can fake these things for certain periods of time to give off the impression that there's something they're not, to achieve a particular goal or outcome that benefits them and only them. And this leads me nicely into looking at the 3 different types of narcissism that we can find listed in the DSM-5. The DSM-5 lists 3 main types of narcissism: malignant, covert and overt. And while there are definitely several subtypes that also exist, I'm going to stick to these 3 in this particular video today. I also just want to reiterate that the purpose of this video is for information only and not for diagnosis of any kind. As I said before, this is all about building awareness for red flags so we might spot the presence of these behaviours and deal with things appropriately. So let's get into the similarities, but more importantly, how we can first spot and then tell the difference between the 3 different types. Thought I'd get this one out of the way first, as it's probably the most severe type of the 3. According to the DSM-5, malignant narcissism combines the traits of narcissistic personality disorder and those associated with antisocial personality disorder, which basically means that people with malignant narcissism probably share the characteristics of what are more commonly called sociopaths and even psychopaths. And clearly, if this is the case, these are a set of people we want to avoid at all costs. Some of the more common signs of malignant narcissism include things like extreme black and white and often paranoid thinking, an obsession with appearance, sadistic and aggressive behaviour, and a complete lack of empathy with a refusal to take responsibility for any impact of action on the people they affect. It's also the case that those dealing with the symptoms of malignant narcissism can struggle with anxiety and extreme paranoia, which can lead them into reliance on addictive behaviours of some kind. This one is sometimes referred to as grandiose narcissism too, and people with overt narcissism are usually the easiest ones for us to spot because they put themselves right out there for everyone to see. They exhibit a high sense of self-esteem, superiority, and a boatload of entitlement, which can present as an overconfidence for their own knowledge on every subject or their abilities to do things that others cannot. This also shows up in an overestimation of their own emotional intelligence and a grandiose estimation of how they behave inside of interpersonal relationships. Much of the research into overt narcissism states that it can be either adaptive or maladaptive. A person with the adaptive type inflate their sense of confidence as a protection mechanism for what is actually an underlying sense of inferiority. They crave positions of power, authority, and leadership roles to inflate their sense of self. Maladaptive overt narcissism is expressed with a sense of entitlement and exploitation. They believe that they're entitled to take advantage of other people and then don't understand why this would offend those that they've taken advantage of. And so they attempt to control and manipulate other people to get what it is that they want. This type can also be connected to periods of depression, anxiety, aggression, neuroticism, and maladaptive behaviours like impulsive buying. And once again, the key factor is a complete lack of empathy for the experience of other people. This is probably the hardest one for us to spot, as it's often a version of NPD that hides right in plain sight. The covert narcissist, which is sometimes known as the vulnerable narcissist, seems from the outside like someone who is the complete opposite of what you might think a narcissist to be. Their belief in themselves, their abilities, and their general sense of entitlement is kept very quiet, usually because underneath it all, there is a low sense of self-worth. As a result, the covert narcissist craves praise and acknowledgement, but has an extreme hypersensitivity to criticism of any kind. They see it as rejection, abandonment, social isolation, and mistrust, which often leads to angry outbursts, looking for attention, or complete disengagement, which is originally intended to keep themselves safe. But then they sit in a space that's filled with blame, specifically attached to others, those that have wronged them. And there's a significant lack of accountability and sometimes even an envy for the achievements of those that they want to be like. The covert narcissist will often attach themselves to certain social or political ideologies, flying under the radar because of what seems like a desire to fight for a particular cause, using the opportunity to virtue signal with the sole intention of receiving the acknowledgement and attention that they so desperately crave. But once again, if this behaviour is challenged, there's an activated sense of rejection that results in an anger that's tied to a protection mechanism of some kind. Sometimes this anger can be internally suppressed, kind of kept under wraps around other people, but behind closed doors, there's definitely a rage of some kind, one that's usually aimed at those that dared to challenge what it is that they're trying to do. The covert narcissist usually has a big fear of the shame that's associated with being laughed at, but at the same time, often gets a great sense of pleasure from laughing at the misfortunes of others. As I said before, the point to all of this is to build awareness, but to what end? First, if you recognise the presence of these extreme examples in yourself, get curious. Maybe reach out for support in working with your personality, taking accountability for your stories and the behaviours connected to them, striving to live the type of life that you want to live. At the same time, remember that just because there's the trait, it doesn't mean that there is the disorder. I myself have looked into these things in great detail and often found myself questioning whether I'm dealing with NPD myself. But at the end of the day, if you're really questioning it, seek the professional support that can help you identify whether this is something that you actually need to work on. Second, if you recognise these behaviours in others, again, let's get curious, explore the possibility of this being a repeating dynamic within your own interpersonal relationships. It's often, but obviously not always the case, that there's something about the signals that this personality type puts out there that is a representation of our own past. Sometimes in group, people will ask the question, what is it about me that attracts this type of person? This is not the case. It's actually that we are drawn to them because of a sense of familiarity, a warped feeling of comfort, and a known way of being. Falling into relationships like this is seen subconsciously as an opportunity to meet our unmet childhood needs with what is a representation of the person we didn't meet them with in the first place. And this is what I call trying to win the unwinnable argument, as even if we get what we want, we're not getting it from the person we wanted it from in the first place, so it doesn't fill that internal void that we're so desperately trying to fill, and it leaves us craving more of the things that we're trying to get away from. Guys, if this speaks to you in some way, take the time to sit with and recognize the subconscious tendency to be drawn towards this dynamic. Build a list of the red flags that highlight these things and get to know this list really, really well. Take accountability for this pattern in your life and develop your capacity to use the skills of DBT when they're integrated with schema therapy to do things like communicate with others, set healthy and adaptive boundaries, and meet your own emotional needs in healthy and adaptive ways, instead of following the path to the same old. Guys, I hope this video gave you some insight for the 3 types of narcissism and the difference between a personality trait and a personality disorder. If you'd like to know more, come join the conversation in our free weekly meetings on Zoom. I'll leave links to the page containing more information about these groups in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and smash that like button. Thanks for watching. See you again soon. Take care, be safe, and be well.